The black stallion crashed through the fence rails like thunder-given flesh, nostrils flaring red as fire, hooves tearing gouges in the dirt of the corral while 3 men scrambled for safety, and a 4th lay groaning where he'd been thrown against the water trough. Yates Xavier leaned against the barn wall in the June heat of 1882, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching the chaos unfold at the McKinnon Ranch just outside Portland, Oregon, where the Willamette Valley stretched green and fertile between mountain ranges. He'd ridden in from his own spread that morning to collect payment for the horses he'd sold old McKinnon last month. But the commotion had drawn him to the corral where half the ranch hands were making fools of themselves trying to break an animal that clearly had no intention of being broken. "Get the rope!" Someone shouted, but the stallion wheeled with impossible grace for something so massive, teeth bared, and the rope fell slack in the dirt. Yates had broken horses since he was 14 years old, spent the better part of his 26 years understanding how they thought and moved, and this animal was different. Not mean, exactly, just absolutely certain of his own freedom. The horse was magnificent, black as midnight without a single white marking, probably 16 hands high with a chest like a barrel and legs built for speed and endurance both. Wild caught from the mountains, someone had said, brought down by trappers who thought they'd make a fortune selling him. "Let me try," a voice called out, and Yates straightened because that voice was decidedly female and coming from the direction of the ranch house. He turned and felt something shift in his chest, some previously steady thing tilting off its axis. She strode across the yard in dusty riding trousers and a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, dark hair braided down her back, and a wide-brimmed hat shading her face from the relentless Oregon sun. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were and not caring much what anyone else thought about it. "Miss Lydia, your father said you weren't to go near that devil," one of the ranch hands called out, clutching his ribs where the stallion had caught him with a glancing blow. "My father is in Portland conducting business, which makes me in charge of this ranch until he returns," she said, climbing onto the bottom rail of the corral fence. "And I'm tired of watching you boys get yourselves killed over a horse that's smarter than all of you put together." Yates found himself moving closer, drawn by curiosity and something else he couldn't quite name. He'd heard of McKinnon's daughter, knew she'd come west from Boston about 2 years back after her mother died, but he'd never actually seen her. Portland society whispered about her the way people always whispered about women who refused to fit into the shapes prepared for them. She'd turned down 3 marriage proposals from prominent men, ran the ranch books better than her father ever had, and could ride better than most men. Yates had dismissed it all as exaggeration. Looking at her now, he wasn't so sure. "You planning to get yourself killed too?" Yates called out, and she turned those eyes on him. They were green, he noticed, the color of new leaves in spring. "You planning to help or just provide commentary?" She shot back, and despite himself, Yates felt his mouth curve into a smile. "Wouldn't dream of interfering with a woman on a mission," he said, tipping his hat. "Yates Xavier, from the X-Bar Ranch up north." "Lydia Fletcher," she said, then turned her attention back to the stallion, who was eyeing them all with deep suspicion, sides heaving, foam flecking his chest. "Beautiful, aren't you?" she murmured, and the horse's ears flicked forward at the sound of her voice. "All this violence, all this fear, and for what? Because you won't let them put a saddle on your back. Miss Fletcher, I really don't think," the foreman started, but she held up one hand without looking at him. "Get everyone out of the corral," she said. "All of you now. But now, Thomas." The men looked at each other, then began climbing out of the corral, muttering among themselves. Yates stayed where he was, fascinated despite himself. The stallion watched the men leave, then turned his full attention to the woman who remained, still perched on the bottom rail of the fence. She didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there in the blazing sun and looked at him. The horse snorted, pawed the ground, tossed his magnificent head. She stayed still. Minutes passed. The horse took a step closer, then another. "Easy," Lydia breathed, so soft Yates barely heard it. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." The stallion's nostrils flared, scenting the air. He was perhaps 10 feet from her now, close enough that if he charged, she'd have no chance of getting clear. Yates felt his muscles tense, ready to vault the fence if needed. Though what good he'd do against that much horseflesh moving at speed he couldn't say. But Lydia didn't move, didn't show a flicker of fear, and slowly, incredibly, the horse's head lowered. His ears, which had been pinned flat against his skull, relaxed into a more natural position. He took another step, then another, and then his nose was inches from her outstretched hand. She let him smell her, let him make the choice, and when he didn't pull away, she touched his muzzle with a gentleness that made Yates's throat tight for reasons he didn't entirely understand. The stallion's eyes rolled, showing white, but he didn't bolt. Lydia murmured something too quiet for Yates to hear, and her hand moved up to stroke the blaze that wasn't there. Just that smooth black forehead. And the horse, the wild devil that had put 4 men on the ground in as many days, stood still and let her touch him. "I'll be damned," one of the ranch hands whispered, and Yates had to agree. Lydia stayed there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, just touching the horse, speaking to him in that low, steady voice, letting him learn that hands didn't always mean pain. When she finally climbed down from the fence rail and walked away, she didn't look back, and the stallion watched her go with something that almost looked like longing in his dark eyes. Yates was waiting by the barn when she came around the corner, and she stopped short when she saw him, then continued on with that same easy confidence. "That was quite a show," he said. "It wasn't a show," she replied, pulling off her hat and wiping sweat from her forehead. "It was a conversation. Most conversations don't involve half a ton of wild animal. Most conversations are less honest." She looked at him directly, assessing. "You're the horse breeder my father mentioned. He said you raise the finest stock in the valley." "I do my best," Yates said, feeling strangely off balance under that direct gaze. He was used to women who lowered their eyes, who blushed and giggled. Lydia Fletcher did none of those things. "Your father bought 6 mares from me last month, good breeding stock. I know, I helped him choose them." She moved past him toward the water pump, worked the handle until cold water gushed out and put her head directly under the stream. When she straightened, water darkened her shirt and plastered loose strands of hair to her neck. "You think I'm foolish, trying to gentle that stallion." It wasn't a question, but Yates answered anyway. "I think you're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most reckless. Haven't decided which yet. Can it be both?" A smile flickered at the corner of her mouth, and Yates felt that strange tilting sensation again, like the world had shifted 6 inches to the left when he wasn't paying attention. "That horse has been beaten, starved, terrorized. The trappers who caught him tried to break his spirit before they broke his body. It didn't work, obviously, but it taught him that humans mean suffering. I won't add to that. So what will you do? Teach him different?" She met his eyes, and he saw absolute certainty there. "It'll take time. Patience. But I'll earn his trust, and when I do, he'll be worth 10 of the horses that get broken the usual way." Yates believed her. More than that, he wanted to watch it happen. "Mind if I come by now and then? See how you're progressing?" Her eyebrows rose. "My father won't be back from Portland until next week. You'll have to collect your payment then." "Wasn't asking about payment," Yates said, and felt heat creep up his neck because he sounded like a green boy instead of a grown man. Just interested in the horse. The horse, Lydia repeated, and that almost smile was back, tucked into the corner of her mouth like a secret. Well, I suppose there's no harm in it. Come by tomorrow around dawn if you're serious. That's when I work with him before the heat sets in. I'll be here, Yates said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. He rode back to his own ranch that afternoon thinking about green eyes and wet hair, and the quiet certainty in her voice when she'd spoken to that wild stallion. The X-Bar spread covered 3,000 acres of prime Oregon territory, running cattle and horses both, and Yates had built it from nothing over the past 8 years. His parents had died of cholera when he was 18, leaving him with a small inheritance and a lot of grief, and he'd poured both into this land until it became something worth having. He employed 12 men year-round, more during branding season, and had a reputation for fair dealing and honest stock. It was a good life, a full life, but riding home in the fading light, he realized it had also been a lonely one. His foreman, Charlie Watts, was waiting by the barn when Yates rode in, a grizzled man of 50 with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. "Get your money from McKinnon?" Charlie asked, taking the reins as Yates swung down. He wasn't there, dealing with business in Portland. "I'll go back next week." Rode 20 miles for nothing then. "Not nothing," Yates said, and something in his voice made Charlie look at him sharply. "McKinnon's got a wild stallion someone's trying to break, black as sin and twice as stubborn, and his daughter's working with it." "Heard about her," Charlie said, leading the horse into the barn. "Heard she's peculiar." "Heard wrong," Yates replied, more sharply than he'd intended. "She's skilled and brave. You should have seen her with that horse." Charlie's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, but he had the wisdom not to comment. "We got a buyer coming tomorrow from Salem, wants to look at those 3-year-old geldings. Handle it for me, would you? I need to ride out early." "Ride out where?" "McKinnon Ranch," Yates said, already heading for the house. "I'll be back by afternoon." He heard Charlie's low chuckle behind him but didn't turn around. Let the old man think what he wanted. Yates was going back to watch a woman gentle a wild horse, nothing more. The fact that he could still see her eyes when he closed his own, could still hear the steady calm of her voice, didn't mean anything. Probably. He was up before the sun, riding through the cool gray dawn while mist rose from the Willamette River and birds started their morning songs in the cottonwoods. The McKinnon Ranch was quiet when he arrived, most of the hands still asleep in the bunkhouse, but Lydia was already at the corral. She'd changed into a split riding skirt and another simple shirt, and her hair was in the same long braid down her back. The stallion stood at the far side of the corral, watching her with alert wariness. "You came," she said without looking around, and Yates wondered how she'd known it was him. "Said I would." He climbed onto the fence rail, settling in to watch. "What's the plan?" "Same as yesterday. Be present, be patient, let him decide." She had a bucket with her, and when she set it down, he caught the scent of molasses and grain. He hasn't eaten much since they brought him in. Too stressed. But hunger will eventually win out over fear if I can prove I'm not a threat. She left the bucket in the center of the corral and climbed back out, settling onto the rail beside Yates. Close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used that morning, something simple and clean like lavender. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher and light spilled across the valley, turning everything golden. The stallion watched them, ears flicking forward and back, muscles tense beneath that gleaming black coat. Minutes passed. 10. 20. And then, finally, the horse took a step toward the bucket, just one. He stopped, snorted, waited. When nothing bad happened, he took another step. "There you go," Lydia breathed. "Smart boy. Nothing to fear here." The stallion reached the bucket, lowered his head cautiously, and began to eat. The sound of his teeth grinding grain was loud in the morning quiet. Yates found himself holding his breath, though he couldn't have said why. There was something sacred about this moment, something pure. This wild creature choosing for the first time to trust. "You got a name for him?" Yates asked quietly. "Shadow," Lydia said. "Because he's dark as one, and because he's been living in the shadow of fear for too long. Time he stepped into the light. That's a good name." They watched Shadow eat, watched him gradually relax, his tail hanging loose instead of flagged in alarm, and when the bucket was empty he raised his head and looked directly at them. For a long moment, the three of them were suspended in time, human and animal, fear and trust, the old world and the new. Then Shadow turned and walked to the far end of the corral, and Lydia let out a breath that Yates hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Progress," she said softly. "How long do you think it'll take before you can ride him? Weeks, maybe months. You can't rush trust." She turned to look at Yates, and in the morning light her eyes were impossibly green. "Why are you really here, Mr. Xavier? You don't strike me as the type of man who has time to waste watching other people work with horses." "I told you I'm interested in the horse." "Yes, you said that." Her gaze was direct, challenging. "But I think maybe you're interested in more than just the horse." Yates felt heat creep up his neck for the second time in as many days, but he held her gaze. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet," Lydia said honestly. "I'm not looking for a husband if that's what you're after. I've turned down better prospects than a horse rancher from up north. I know, Portland society talks. Portland society can go hang." She said it matter-of-factly, without heat. "I came west to be free, not to trade one cage for another. My mother spent her whole life doing what was expected, saying what was appropriate, being the perfect wife to the perfect husband, and it killed something in her long before the consumption finished the job. I won't live like that." "I'm not asking you to," Yates said, and realized it was true. He didn't want this woman diminished or caged or made small. He wanted her exactly as she was, fierce and free and utterly certain. "I'm just asking if I can come back tomorrow, watch you work with Shadow, maybe get to know you a little better in the process." Lydia studied him for a long moment, and Yates had the uncomfortable feeling she could see straight through to his bones, could read every thought he'd ever had and judge them accordingly. Then she smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face, and nodded. "Tomorrow, then. Same time." He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the one after that. Each morning he rode through the dawn to the McKinnon ranch, and each morning Lydia was there, working with Shadow. The stallion began to trust her, slowly but surely. She moved from leaving the grain bucket and retreating to staying in the corral while he ate, to touching him while he ate, to running her hands down his neck and over his withers. She never forced, never rushed. Just offered herself as a constant presence. And Shadow began to seek her out instead of avoiding her. On the 5th day, she put a halter on him. It took 3 hours of patient work, letting him smell the leather, rubbing it over his body, showing him it wasn't a trap, and when she finally buckled it around his head, Yates saw tears in her eyes. "Good boy," she whispered, her forehead pressed against Shadow's neck. "Such a good, brave boy." Yates climbed down from the fence and walked to the barn, needing a moment to himself because his own throat was tight with emotion. He'd broken dozens of horses in his life, hundreds maybe, and never once had he felt like this. Lydia was teaching him something, showing him a different way, and he was learning more than just horsemanship. "You're falling for her," Charlie said when Yates got back to his own ranch that afternoon. It wasn't a question. "Is it that obvious?" You've been riding out every dawn for a week and coming back looking like you've seen the face of God. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. Charlie leaned against the fence, watching the yearlings in the near pasture. She feel the same way. I don't know, Yates admitted. She's not like anyone I've ever met, Charlie. She's not interested in marriage or settling down or any of the things women are supposed to want. Maybe she just hasn't met the right man yet. Or maybe she's smart enough to know that marriage means giving up her freedom, her choices, her voice. Her mother died that way, suffocated by expectations. You planning to suffocate her? Hell no, Yates said fiercely. I'd rather lose her entirely than see her diminished. Charlie nodded slowly. Then maybe you should tell her that. Because running around pretending you're just interested in watching her train a horse isn't going to get you anywhere except frustrated. Yates knew the old man was right, but knowing and doing were two different things. What if he told Lydia how he felt and she laughed at him? What if she stopped letting him come around, stopped sharing those quiet morning hours? The thought of losing even that much was enough to keep his mouth shut and his feelings locked down tight. On the 10th day, Lydia led Shadow around the corral on a lead rope, and the stallion followed her like a puppy, his nose practically on her shoulder. Yates watched from the fence, his heart doing things in his chest that had nothing to do with horsemanship and everything to do with the woman walking circles in the dust. She glanced up at him, caught him staring, and smiled that secret smile that made his pulse stutter. "Want to try?" She called out, "Try what?" leading him. "Come on, he needs to learn that not all humans are monsters." Yates climbed into the corral with some trepidation. Shadow's ears flattened when he approached and the horse sidled away, tossing his head. But Lydia was there, her hand on the stallion's neck, murmuring reassurance, and gradually Shadow settled. She handed Yates the lead rope, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. Such a small thing, barely worth noticing, but Yates felt it like lightning straight to his core. "Easy," Lydia said, and he wasn't entirely sure if she was talking to him or the horse. "Just walk, slow and steady. Let him feel that you're not a threat." Yates began to walk, and after a moment's hesitation, Shadow followed. The stallion's breath was hot on the back of Yates's neck, his hooves thudding heavy in the dirt, and the awareness that over 1,000 pounds of barely tamed wildness was inches behind him made every nerve sing with alertness. But there was also pride, fierce and bright, because this magnificent animal was choosing to trust him, to follow him. And that meant something. They walked 3 circuits of the corral before Yates handed the rope back to Lydia, and when he did, she was looking at him with something new in her eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You're good with him," she said. "I've been working with horses all my life. It's more than that." She stroked Shadow's neck, and the stallion lowered his head to lip at her shirt pocket, searching for treats. "You respect him, his spirit. His right to be who he is. Most men see horses as tools, things to be used and discarded when they break down. You see them as partners. Partners make life better," Yates said. "Tools just make it easier. There's a difference." "Yes," Lydia said softly. "There is." They stood there in the growing heat of the morning, Shadow between them, and something shifted. The air felt thicker, charged like the moment before a storm breaks. Yates wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to say all the things that had been building in his chest for the past 2 weeks, but fear held him frozen. Fear that he'd misread everything, that she'd pull away, that he'd ruin this fragile thing growing between them. "Lydia," he started, then stopped because he didn't know how to finish. She waited, patient as she was with Shadow, giving him time to find the words. But before he could, hoofbeats sounded from the direction of the house, and they both turned to see a rider approaching. The man was well dressed in city clothes, riding a showy Palomino gelding, and when he spotted Lydia, his face broke into a wide smile. "Lydia, there you are. I've been looking all over for you." "Richard," Lydia said, and Yates heard something flat in her voice, something wary. "What are you doing here?" "Your father's back from Portland. He invited me to stay for a few days, said we should get to know each other better." The man, Richard, dismounted and strode toward the corral with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "He mentioned you were training some wild horse, but I had to see it to believe it." "Shadow's not wild anymore," Lydia said, moving subtly to put herself between the horse and the newcomer. "He's learning to trust." "Shadow, you named it," Richard laughed, and it wasn't a kind sound. "Lydia, you can't get attached to livestock. It's unseemly." Yates felt his jaw clench, felt anger rise hot and quick, but Lydia spoke before he could. "Shadow is not livestock, and I'll thank you not to dismiss my work." Her voice was ice-cold, controlled. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish the morning session before it gets too hot." Richard's eyes slid to Yates for the first time, and his expression cooled. "And who might you be?" "Yates Xavier. I have a ranch up north." "Ah, yes, the horse trader. My father mentioned buying some stock from you." Richard said it the way he might have said the stable boy or the gardener, dripping with condescension. "I'm Richard Thornton. My father owns the largest timber operation in Oregon. Lydia and I are practically engaged." "We are not," Lydia said sharply. "You asked. I said no. That was the end of the discussion." "Your father thinks you just need time to get used to the idea," Richard said, his smile never wavering. "He's a practical man. He understands that a woman on her own is vulnerable, needs protection. Needs guidance. I need neither of those things, especially not from you." Lydia turned her back on Richard, dismissing him entirely, and addressed Yates. "Same time tomorrow, I'll be here," Yates said, and saw gratitude flash in her eyes. He rode away with Richard's voice echoing behind him, all false charm and subtle threats wrapped in polite words, and his hands were white-knuckled on the reins. A woman on her own is vulnerable. The implication was clear. Richard Thornton thought he could pressure Lydia into marriage, thought her father's approval was more important than her own wishes. And maybe, in most cases, he'd be right. But Lydia Fletcher wasn't most women, and Yates would be damned if he'd let some timber baron's arrogant son bully her into a cage. The question was, what could he do about it? He had no claim on Lydia, no right to interfere in her life. They'd known each other less than 2 weeks, had never even touched beyond that one accidental brush of fingers. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the corral with Shadow, saw the way she'd positioned herself to protect the horse from Richard's disdain, saw the quiet strength in every line of her body, and knew with absolute certainty that he was in love with her. Completely. Irrevocably. In the kind of love that came along maybe once in a lifetime if you were lucky. He spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling of his bedroom, trying to figure out what to do, and when dawn came he was back in the saddle, riding toward the McKinnon ranch with his heart in his throat. Lydia was waiting by the corral, but she wasn't alone. Richard was there, and McKinnon himself, a heavy-set man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a calculating expression. "Ah, Mr. Xavier," McKinnon called out. "Good timing. I have your payment ready, and I wanted to discuss possibly purchasing more stock come autumn." Yates dismounted, shook McKinnon's hand, tried not to stare at Lydia. She looked tired, he thought, like maybe she hadn't slept much either. "Always happy to talk business, sir." "Excellent. Come up to the house, we'll have coffee and discuss terms." McKinnon gestured toward the main building. "Lydia, you and Richard should take a ride, get some air. It's too hot for that nonsense with the horse anyway." "I'm working with Shadow," Lydia said firmly. "We have a schedule." "The horse can wait." Richard has ridden all this way to spend time with you. The least you can do is be hospitable." There was steel under McKinnon's genial tone, a warning. Yates saw Lydia's jaw tighten, saw her hands clench into fists at her sides, but she nodded. "Of course. Give me a few minutes to change." She stalked toward the house and Richard followed, leaving Yates alone with McKinnon. The older man watched his daughter go, then sighed. "She's stubborn, my Lydia. Gets it from her mother, God rest her soul, but she'll come around." Richard is a good match, solid prospects, connections that will serve this ranch well in the future. "Does she want to marry him?" Yates asked, unable to help himself. McKinnon's eyes sharpened. "What a woman wants and what's best for her aren't always the same thing, Mr. Xavier. I learned that the hard way with my wife. She wanted to stay in Boston, wanted the society life, the parties and culture. I brought her out here because I saw opportunity, and for 20 years she was miserable. But we built something, this ranch, this life. Sometimes we have to be practical instead of romantic." Yates thought about Lydia's words, about her mother dying with something inside her already dead, and felt sick. "With respect, sir, that doesn't sound like much of a life." "No," McKinnon agreed quietly. "It doesn't. Which is why I'm trying to do better by my daughter. Richard may not be who she'd choose if I left her to her own devices, but he's stable, reliable, and he won't drag her off to some uncertain future. He's also pompous, dismissive of her abilities, and treats her like a piece of property," Yates said, then immediately regretted it because McKinnon's expression went cold. "That's bold talk from a man I barely know. What's your interest in my daughter, Mr. Xavier?" Yates could have lied, could have backed down, could have said he was just concerned as a friend. Instead, he met McKinnon's eyes and told the truth. "I'm in love with her, sir. Have been since the first moment I saw her work with that Stallion. She's the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I think she should get to choose her own future, whether that's with Richard or me or nobody at all." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, chickens scratching in the yard, the creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. Finally, McKinnon laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. "You've got spine, I'll give you that." Most men would have smiled and nodded and gone about their business. He shook his head. "But love isn't enough, Mr. Xavier. Love doesn't pay bills or secure futures. My daughter needs security." "Your daughter needs freedom," Yates countered, "and respect. And someone who sees her as an equal partner, not a beautiful burden to be managed. And you think you're that someone? I know I could be, if she'd have me." Yates took a breath, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not wealthy like Richard Thornton, but my ranch is profitable and growing. I have good land, good stock, and a reputation for honest dealing. I could provide for Lydia. But more than that, I'd never ask her to be less than she is. I'd never try to cage her or diminish her or make her into some man's idea of what a woman should be." McKinnon studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the corral where Shadow stood watching them with alert interest. "You see that horse? Your daughter gentled him in less than 2 weeks. No whips, no spurs, no breaking his spirit, just patience and respect and giving him the choice to trust. That's who she is, Mr. McKinnon. That's what she's capable of. Richard Thornton would never see that, never value it. He'd spend his whole life trying to break her to saddle, and he'd fail, and they'd both be miserable in the process. And you wouldn't. I wouldn't try. I'd just walk beside her and be grateful she let me." McKinnon was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant. "Her mother asked me once, near the end, if I'd ever really seen her, really looked at who she was instead of who I needed her to be. I couldn't answer. I'd spent 20 years so focused on building this ranch, on succeeding, that I'd forgotten to see the woman I'd married. I won't make that mistake with my daughter." He turned to Yates, and there was something hard in his eyes, a test. You say you love her. Prove it. Court her properly. Show me you're serious. And if she chooses you, if she wants you, then you have my blessing. But if you hurt her, if you fail her the way I failed her mother, I'll destroy you. Understood? Understood, Yates said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They went into the house to discuss horses and payment, and by the time they emerged, Lydia and Richard had returned from their ride. Lydia looked furious, Richard looked smug, and Yates felt his stomach drop. Whatever had happened out there, it wasn't good. Thank you for the ride, Richard, Lydia said with icy politeness. I'm sure you'll understand if I don't join you for lunch. I have work to do. Of course, Richard said smoothly. I'll see you at dinner. Your father and I have much to discuss. Lydia waited until Richard had gone inside, then turned on her father. Tell me you didn't invite him here to pressure me into marriage. I invited him here because he's a good man with good prospects, and you're 23 years old with no husband and no immediate plans for one. What do you expect me to do, Lydia? Let you grow old alone on this ranch? If that's what I choose, yes. Her voice cracked with frustration. I'm not mother. I won't die slowly in a life I hate just because it's proper or practical or whatever other excuse you want to use. Your mother hated it here. You know she did. And you brought her anyway because it's what you wanted, and she went along because that's what women did. I won't do that, Father. I won't marry Richard Thornton or anyone else unless I choose to. McKinnon's face was red, but before he could respond, Yates stepped forward. Mr. McKinnon has given me permission to court you, he said, and both Lydia and her father turned to stare at him. If you're willing. No pressure, no expectations. Just the chance to get to know each other better and see where things go. Lydia's eyes went wide. You asked my father's permission to court me. I did. Without asking me first, I'm asking you now. Yates held her gaze, willing her to understand. I know you don't need anyone's permission to make your own choices, but I wanted your father to know I'm serious, that my intentions are honorable, that I'm not some cowboy looking for a dalliance. I'm looking for a partner, Lydia, an equal, someone to build a life with. And I think that might be you, if you'll give me the chance to prove it. The silence that followed was excruciating. Yates could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel sweat trickling down his spine despite the morning cool. Lydia just looked at him, her expression unreadable, and he was certain he'd ruined everything, had pushed too hard too fast. Then she smiled, slow and genuine, and nodded. All right, Yates Xavier. You can court me, but I warn you I'm not easy to please, and I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I wouldn't want you any other way, Yates said, and felt like his heart might burst right out of his chest. McKinnon cleared his throat. I'm going inside. You two work out whatever details you need to work out, but Lydia, you will be civil to Richard while he's a guest in this house. Understood? Understood, Lydia said, though the look she shot her father suggested civility might be a stretch. When McKinnon was gone, Lydia turned to Yates, arms crossed, but there was laughter in her eyes now. That was quite a speech, meant every word. I know. That's what scares me. She walked to the corral, and after a moment Yates followed. Shadow came to the fence immediately, nosing at Lydia's pockets for treats. I've spent 2 years making it very clear I'm not interested in marriage. Every man in Portland knows it, and yet here you are, asking to court me, and I said yes. Why do you think that is? Because I'm devastatingly handsome and charming, Yates tried and was rewarded with a laugh. Because you see me, Lydia said softly. When you watch me with Shadow, you don't see a woman doing something unnatural or strange. You see skill and patience and partnership. When I speak, you listen. When I have opinions, you respect them. And when I told my father I won't be caged, you defended that. You are the first man who ever has. Yates moved closer, close enough to reach out and touch if he dared. "I told your father I'd walk beside you, not try to lead you." "I meant that, Lydia. Whatever life we build, if we build one, it'll be together, equal partners." "That's a pretty dream," she said, but there was longing in her voice. "But marriage doesn't work that way. The law doesn't work that way. Once I marry, everything I own becomes my husband's property. This ranch, my horses, even my own body. I'd have no legal right to refuse you anything." "Then we'll find another way," Yates said fiercely. "I don't care about the law. I care about you, about treating you right, about building something real. If that means finding a lawyer to write up contracts that protect your interests, we'll do it. If it means never getting married at all, just building a life together without the legal entanglement, we'll do that too. Whatever you need to feel safe and free, Lydia. I'll move heaven and earth to give it to you." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw hope warring with fear in her eyes. Hope won. "Then let's start with courting and see where it goes," she said. "But I'm still working with Shadow every morning, and I won't give that up." "I wouldn't ask you to. In fact, I'd like to keep helping if you'll let me." "I'd like that too." They stood there in the morning sun, Shadow between them, and Yates felt something settle in his chest, some restless thing finally finding its home. This was right. This woman, this moment, this beginning. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, he knew they'd face them together. The next weeks unfolded like a dream, sweet and strange and somehow more real than anything Yates had experienced before. He rode to the McKinnon ranch every morning before dawn, and he and Lydia worked with Shadow together. The Stallion progressed rapidly, going from tolerating a saddle blanket to accepting a saddle, from allowing Lydia's weight across his back to carrying her around the corral at a walk. Yates was there for all of it, offering a steady hand when needed, staying back when Shadow needed space, learning to read the horse's moods and intentions the way Lydia did. But more than that, he learned Lydia. He learned that she was fiercest in the early morning, all sharp edges and determination, and softened as the day wore on. He learned that she'd studied veterinary medicine in Boston before her mother died, had wanted to be a doctor for animals, but no university would accept a woman into their program. He learned that she could speak 3 languages, read Latin, and had a mind like a steel trap when it came to numbers. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated tea parties, that she could shoot better than most men and had absolutely no patience for needlework. And somewhere in the learning, he fell deeper in love. They took rides together in the afternoons, exploring the valley, and Lydia showed him places she'd found in her 2 years in Oregon, hidden meadows and cold streams, groves of ancient trees that had been old when the first white settlers arrived. They talked about everything and nothing, philosophy and practicality, dreams and fears, and Yates found himself sharing things he'd never told another living soul. How lonely he'd been after his parents died. How he'd poured himself into building the ranch because it was easier than facing the grief. How sometimes he woke in the night and felt the weight of responsibility crushing him, all those men depending on him for their livelihood, all those animals depending on him for their care. "I know," Lydia said one afternoon. They were sitting by a creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "The weight of it, everyone looking to you to have the answers, to be strong, to never falter. It's exhausting. But you handle it so well." "I hide it well," she corrected. "There's a difference. Most nights I lie awake wondering if I made the right call on some decision, if I'm running the ranch into the ground, if my father made a mistake trusting me with the books. But come morning, I get up and do it all again, because what else is there? There's asking for help," Yates said gently. "There's admitting you don't have all the answers. There's being human." "Is that what you do?" I'm learning to. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were calloused from rope and reins, strong and capable, and they fit perfectly in his. I'm learning that being strong doesn't mean being alone, that asking for help doesn't make you weak. And who do you ask for help? Lydia's thumb traced small circles on the back of his hand, sending sparks up his arm. Charlie, mostly. He's been with me since the beginning, knows the ranch as well as I do. And now you, maybe, if you're willing. I'm willing, she said softly, and when he leaned in to kiss her, she met him halfway. It was a gentle kiss, careful and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Lydia was smiling. I've been wondering when you'd get around to that. I didn't want to rush you. Yates Xavier, you are possibly the most patient man I've ever met. It's infuriating and wonderful in equal measure. He kissed her again, less carefully this time, and felt her laugh against his mouth. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to set, talking and kissing and planning a future that was starting to feel less like a dream and more like a possibility. But not everything was perfect. Richard Thornton remained at the McKinnon ranch, a constant irritating presence, and he made no secret of his disapproval of Yates's courtship. He'd find ways to monopolize Lydia's time, insist on joining their afternoon rides, make snide comments about ranch hands who didn't know their place. Yates bore it all with gritted teeth, refusing to rise to the bait, but it wore on him, and it wore on Lydia more. He won't leave, she said one evening, 2 weeks into the courtship. They were in the barn, checking on a mare who'd shown signs of colic earlier. My father invited him for a few days, and it's been 2 weeks. He just sits there at dinner talking about timber contracts and business opportunities, looking at me like I'm another asset to be acquired. Have you asked your father to send him away? 3 times. He says it would be rude, that Richard is an important connection. Lydia's hand stilled on the mare's side. I think he's still hoping I'll change my mind, choose Richard over you. Will you? Yates asked quietly. No, she said it without hesitation, fierce and certain. No, I won't. But I'm worried about what my father might do. The ranch is his, technically. If he decided to force the issue, to threaten my position here unless I marry Richard, I'd have no legal recourse. The fear in her voice made Yates's chest ache. Then come to my ranch. Work with me, build something with me. You don't need his approval. I can't just leave. This ranch is my home, these horses are my responsibility. Shadow needs me. Shadow's ready, Yates said gently. You know he is. Tomorrow morning, you could ride him out of this corral and he'd follow you anywhere. You've given him everything he needed. Maybe it's time to take what you need. Lydia was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on the mare's neck. The horse had calmed, the colic passing, and stood peacefully in the lantern light. I'm scared, Lydia admitted finally, of choosing wrong, of losing everything, of failing. I know, Yates said, but you're the bravest person I've ever met. You stood in a corral with a wild stallion and never flinched. You can stand up to your father. You can choose your own path. And if I choose you, then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. She kissed him then. They're in the barn with the smell of hay and horses around them, and it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped or turned aside. When they finally pulled apart, Lydia was smiling and the fear had gone from her eyes. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow I ride Shadow for the first time, and then we'll see what happens next. Tomorrow came with a brilliant sunrise, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink, and Lydia was in the corral with Shadow before full light. Yates was there too, and so was McKinnon, drawn by the significance of the moment. Even Richard had roused himself early to watch, though his expression suggested he expected disaster. Shadow stood quiet in the center of the corral, saddled and bridled, and Lydia approached him with her usual calm confidence. She ran her hands down his neck, speaking too quietly for Yates to hear, and the stallion lowered his head, blowing softly into her hair. Then, in one smooth motion, she put her foot in the stirrup and swung into the saddle. Shadow tensed, every muscle rigid, and for a moment Yates thought the horse might explode into bucking. But Lydia just sat there, relaxed and centered, her hands light on the reins, and gradually the stallion settled beneath her. His ears swiveled, tracking her every movement, but he didn't bolt or rear, didn't try to unseat her, just stood, breathing hard, learning this new thing. "Walk on," Lydia said gently, and nudged him with her heels. Shadow took one hesitant step forward, then another, and then he was walking, stiff-legged but willing, around the corral while Lydia guided him with the lightest of touches. Yates felt his throat close with emotion, felt tears prick at his eyes, though he'd die before admitting it. This was everything. This moment, this triumph, this woman and this wild creature choosing each other. He'd witnessed something sacred, and he knew he'd carry it with him the rest of his life. Lydia rode Shadow for perhaps 10 minutes, walking circles, teaching him to turn left and right, to halt and move forward on command. When she finally dismounted, she was grinning so wide it looked like her face might split in two. "He's perfect," she said, throwing her arms around Shadow's neck. "You're absolutely perfect." "That was remarkable," McKinnon said, and there was genuine pride in his voice. "Truly remarkable, Lydia. I've never seen anything like it." "Impressive trick," Richard said dismissively, "though I'm not sure what practical use a half-tamed wild horse has." "He's not half-tamed, he's fully partnered," Lydia shot back. "And the use is in the relationship itself. Shadow will give me everything he has because he chooses to, not because he's been broken into submission. That's worth more than a dozen beaten horses. If you say so." Richard checked his pocket watch. "I should be getting back to Portland anyway. Business to attend to. I've stayed longer than I intended as it is." Relief washed over Yates so strong he felt dizzy. Finally. 2 weeks of walking on eggshells, of biting his tongue, of watching Richard circle Lydia like a wolf around wounded prey. Finally, it would be over. But Richard wasn't done. He turned to McKinnon, smile sharp. "I trust you'll consider my proposal. The merger between our operations would benefit us both substantially, and of course the marriage would cement the partnership." "Marriage?" Lydia's voice could have frozen fire. "What marriage?" McKinnon had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Richard and I have been discussing a business arrangement. His timber operation and our ranch, a combined enterprise. It would make us the largest agricultural concern in the territory." "And what does that have to do with marriage?" "Such partnerships are traditionally cemented by family ties," Richard said smoothly. "Your father and I agree that a marriage between us would be the ideal solution." "You agree?" Lydia repeated, her voice deadly quiet. "You and my father, without consulting me at all." "Now, Lydia, be reasonable," McKinnon started, but she cut him off. "Reasonable? You want me to be reasonable while you two trade me like cattle to seal a business deal? No one's trading you, don't be dramatic. I'm simply pointing out that Richard is a good match, and this arrangement would benefit everyone involved. Everyone except me." Lydia looked at her father with something like betrayal in her eyes. "You said you wouldn't force me. You said if I chose differently, you'd respect that." "I said you could choose," McKinnon corrected. "But I also have to consider what's best for this ranch, for our future. Marrying Richard would secure that future." "No," Lydia said flatly. "I won't do it. I choose Yates." "And if you can't accept that, if you're going to hold the ranch over my head until I agree to marry a man I don't love, then I'll leave. I'll go to Yates's ranch and build a life there instead." "You'd abandon everything you've built here, all your work." McKinnon's face was red now, anger and desperation mixing. "I'd abandon a cage," Lydia said. "Which is what this place becomes if staying means surrendering my freedom. I love this ranch, Father. I love these horses and this land and the work we do here, but I won't sacrifice myself for it. Mother did that and it killed her. I won't make the same mistake." Silence fell heavy as a stone. Richard looked furious, McKinnon looked stricken, and Yates felt like his heart was trying to climb out through his throat. Lydia had just chosen him, publicly and irrevocably, and the weight of that choice, the trust it represented, was almost more than he could bear. "Well," Richard said finally, ice in every syllable, "I can see there's no reasoning with you. Good luck, Miss Fletcher. I suspect you'll need it." He turned to McKinnon. "If you change your mind about the business proposal, you know where to find me. But the marriage offer is rescinded. I won't tie myself to a woman who can't see sense." He stalked away toward the house to collect his things, leaving the three of them in heavy silence. Finally, McKinnon sighed. "You're sure about this? About him?" "I'm sure," Lydia said. "I know you're trying to protect me, Father. I know you think you're doing what's best. But you can't protect me from life, from choices, from the possibility of getting hurt, and you shouldn't try. I'm not a child. I'm a grown woman, and I'm choosing Yates." McKinnon looked at Yates, really looked at him, and Yates met his gaze without flinching. "You'll take care of her, provide for her, treat her as an equal like you promised." "On my life," Yates said. "Then I suppose I have no choice but to accept." McKinnon moved to his daughter, pulled her into an embrace. "I'm sorry for trying to control this, for forgetting that you're your own person with your own dreams. Your mother would be ashamed of me." "Mother would understand," Lydia said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "You're just trying to protect me in the only way you know how, but I don't need protection, Father. I need support. There's a difference. I'm learning that." He pulled back, looked between Lydia and Yates. "So what happens now?" "Now I marry him," Lydia said, taking Yates's hand. "If he'll have me." "Have you?" Yates laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Lydia Fletcher, I've been yours since the moment I saw you touch that wild stallion. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything, always yes." She kissed him there in the dust of the corral, with her father and Shadow watching, and it tasted like freedom and promises and the beginning of everything good. When they finally broke apart, McKinnon was smiling despite the moisture in his eyes. "I suppose we should start planning a wedding then. Unless you two want to just run off to Portland and find a preacher." "Actually," Lydia said slowly, an idea forming. "I'd like to get married here, on the ranch. Something simple, just family and friends, maybe in a month. That gives us time to prepare for Yates to get his affairs in order." "A month it is," Yates agreed. "Though I warn you, I don't have much family. Charlie and the ranch hands are about it. Then they'll be there and they'll be welcome." Lydia squeezed his hand. "This isn't about spectacle or society. It's about us, choosing each other, building something real." The next month passed in a blur of preparation and joy. Yates and Lydia spent every day together, planning their future, combining their ranches into one larger operation. McKinnon, to his credit, signed over a substantial portion of his land to Lydia as a wedding gift, ensuring she'd have property in her own name even after the marriage. Yates matched it with a legal contract drafted by the best lawyer in Portland, stipulating that all property would be held jointly, all decisions made together, and that if anything happened to him, everything would go to Lydia without question. It wasn't perfect. The law still didn't recognize married women as fully independent, but it was the best they could do within the confines of 1882 Oregon. The wedding took place on a warm July day, with the Cascade Mountains rising purple in the distance and wildflowers blooming across the valley. They stood beneath an arch of pine branches, Lydia in a simple ivory dress she'd made herself, Yates in his best suit with his hair slicked back and his heart in his throat. Charlie stood up as best man, and one of the ranch women served as Lydia's attendant, and when the traveling preacher asked if they took each other, their "I do" rang out clear and strong. They honeymooned on Yates's ranch, the ex-bar that was now theirs together, and spent the days riding the property and the nights learning each other in ways both tender and fierce. Lydia brought Shadow with her, and the stallion settled into his new home with surprising ease, as if he understood that wherever Lydia went was home. They began breeding him to the best mares, and his offspring proved as remarkable as their sire, smart and strong and willing. The combined operation flourished under their joint management. Lydia's head for numbers and eye for good stock combined with Yates's years of experience and reputation for quality, and within a year, they'd expanded to 5,000 acres and employed 20 men year-round. They built a new house together, bigger than Yates's bachelor cabin but still modest, with a wide porch that looked out over the valley and a bedroom that caught the morning sun. They filled it with books and laughter and the small accumulations of a shared life. When Lydia got pregnant in the spring of 1884, Yates thought his heart might actually burst from happiness. She carried well, strong and healthy, working with the horses right up until the last month. Their son was born in December, a howling red-faced creature with Yates's dark hair and Lydia's green eyes, and they named him Daniel, after Yates's father. Holding his son for the first time, feeling that small weight in his arms and seeing Lydia exhausted and radiant in the bed, Yates understood what his own father must have felt. The fierce, overwhelming love, the determination to do better, to be better, to give this tiny person everything. Lydia recovered quickly from the birth, driven by a determination to get back to the horses, and by the time Daniel was 3 months old, she had him strapped to her chest while she worked in the barn. Yates watched her one morning, saw her murmuring to their son while she checked a mare's hooves, and felt so much love it ached. "You're staring again," Lydia said without looking up. "Can't help it. You're worth staring at." Flatterer. But she was smiling as she straightened, shifting Daniel to a more comfortable position. "This one's ready to foal any day now. We should keep close watch." "I'll take night duty," Yates offered. "You need your sleep." "We'll take turns," Lydia corrected. "Partners, remember." "Partners," Yates agreed, and kissed her there in the barn, their son between them, the mare watching with placid interest. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's fearlessness and his father's gentle way with animals. By the time he was 3, he was toddling after Lydia in the barn, trying to help with chores. At 5, he could ride better than some grown men, perched on Shadow's broad back with complete confidence. The stallion, now in his prime, seemed to understand he carried precious cargo and was unfailingly gentle with the boy. A daughter followed when Daniel was 4, a fierce little thing they named Alina after Lydia's mother. She had Yates's dark eyes and Lydia's stubborn chin, and from the moment she could walk, she wanted to be wherever the horses were. Then came another son 2 years later, Thomas, quieter than his siblings but with an uncanny ability to read animals. McKinnon doted on his grandchildren, spending more and more time at the ex-bar ranch as he aged, teaching them about the land and the business, trying to make up for the mistakes he'd made with Lydia. The years rolled past like water over stones, smooth and inevitable. The ranch prospered. Oregon grew and changed around them, more settlers arriving, Portland expanding from a rough river town into a proper city. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good years and struggled through lean ones. Yates's hair started to gray at the temples, and Lydia found laugh lines around her eyes, but the love between them never faltered. If anything, It grew deeper, richer, tempered by the challenges they'd overcome together. When Daniel turned 16 in 1900, tall and strong and earnest, he asked if he could start taking on more responsibility with the breeding program. Yates looked at Lydia, saw his own pride reflected in her eyes, and nodded. "It's yours as much as ours, son. This whole ranch, everything we've built, it'll be yours and your siblings someday. Might as well start learning how to run it properly." "I want to do it the way you taught me," Daniel said. "The way Mom works with the horses, partnership instead of dominance, respect instead of force." "That's the only way worth doing it," Lydia said, and pulled her son into a hug. "Your father and we built this place on that principle. Trust and respect and choosing each other every day. Remember that, whatever you do. In the work, in your relationships, in your life. Choose partnership. Choose love." That night, Yates and Lydia sat on their porch watching the sun set over the valley, Daniel and Alina and Thomas inside arguing good-naturedly about something. Lydia's head rested on Yates's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and everything was exactly as it should be. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked quietly. "Choosing me instead of the easier path? Richard Thornton would have given you wealth, status, all the things society says women should want." "Richard Thornton would have given me a cage," Lydia said. "You gave me wings. No, I don't regret it. Not for a single moment. This life, this ranch, these children, it's everything I never knew I wanted and everything I needed." "I love you," Yates said, the words as easy now as breathing after nearly 18 years of marriage. "I'll love you until the day I die and beyond if there's anything after." "I know," Lydia said, and turned to kiss him soft and sweet. "I love you too, my wild cowboy who saw a wild woman and decided she was worth the risk. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Lydia corrected. "The first best was watching me gentle shadow that day. If you hadn't stopped to watch, hadn't been curious enough to come back the next morning, none of this would have happened." "Fate, maybe," Yates mused. "Or luck. Or just being in the right place at the right moment." "Or maybe some things are just meant to be," Lydia said. "That stallion needed me, needed someone who would see him as more than an animal to be broken. And I needed you, needed someone who would see me the same way. We found each other because we were supposed to. Because the universe knew we'd be better together than apart." Yates thought about that, about the strange series of chances and choices that had led him to the McKinnon ranch that day in June 1882. If he'd come a day earlier or later, if he'd decided to send Charlie for the payment instead of going himself, if he'd walked away when the other men told him the wild stallion was too dangerous. So many moments where things could have gone differently, and yet they'd led here, to this porch, this woman, this life. "However it happened," he said finally, "I'm grateful. Every single day I wake up grateful that you're beside me." "Sentimental old cowboy," Lydia teased, but her eyes were soft. "Old, I'm 44, that's prime of life. If you say so." She laughed at his mock offense, then sobered. "But truly, Yates, these have been the best years of my life. Building this place with you, raising our children, working with the horses. I never imagined I could be this happy, this fulfilled. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me." "Always," Yates said. "In this life and any other that might come, I choose you, Lydia Xavier, forever." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, the sounds of their children's laughter drifting through the windows, the horses settling in the barn, the whole ranch breathing around them like a living thing. Shadow was out in the near pasture. His black coat turned silver in the moonlight, and Yates thought about that day so long ago when a wild stallion had helped him recognize his match in an equally wild woman. Everything they'd built, everything they'd become, had started there in that corral with dust and fear and the slow, patient work of building trust. It had never been easy. There had been fights and failures, moments of doubt and despair. But there had also been triumphs and joy, and the steady accumulation of days lived fully together, as partners in every sense of the word. The children grew. Daniel took over more and more of the daily operations, showing the same skill and patience his mother had demonstrated with Shadow. Alina married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who respected her fierce independence, and they built their own spread on land Yates, and Lydia gave them as a wedding gift. Thomas discovered a talent for veterinary medicine and went east to study, then came back to Oregon to practice, serving ranches throughout the valley. McKinnon passed away peacefully in 1905, surrounded by his grandchildren, and Lydia wept for the complicated man who tried his best even when his best fell short. They buried him in the small cemetery on what had been his ranch, now fully merged with the X-Bar operation, and Lydia stood at his grave and made her peace with the past. Shadow lived to the remarkable age of 28, producing offspring that carried his intelligence and spirit across Oregon and beyond. When he finally passed in 1910, lying down in his favorite pasture one autumn afternoon and simply not getting up again, Lydia mourned him like a member of the family. Because that's what he'd been, the bridge that had brought her to Yates, the teacher who'd shown them both what partnership really meant. He was a good horse, Yates said, holding Lydia while she cried into his shoulder. The best I ever knew. He was more than that, Lydia said. He was a gift. A reminder that wild things don't need to be broken, just understood. That strength and gentleness can coexist. That trust is earned, not demanded. They buried Shadow on a hill overlooking the valley and planted an oak tree to mark the spot. In the years that followed, as that tree grew tall and strong, Yates and Lydia would sometimes ride up there and sit in its shade, remembering. The ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's management, and Yates and Lydia slowly stepped back, content to advise rather than direct. They traveled some, taking a trip to San Francisco and another to Seattle, but always returned to Oregon, to the valley and the mountains and the land they'd built their life on. In 1915, on their 33rd wedding anniversary, Yates woke early to watch the sunrise from their porch. Lydia joined him a few minutes later, her hair more silver than dark now, her hands gnarled from decades of hard work, but her eyes still that same piercing green. "Good morning, husband," she said, settling into the chair beside his. "Good morning, wife. Happy anniversary. 33 years." "Where did the time go?" "Into this," Yates said, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them. Barns and corrals, pastures dotted with horses and cattle, the new house Daniel had built for his growing family, the old house where Alina's oldest son now lived. Into us. Into everything that matters. No regrets, not a single one. Only that I can't live it all again, Lydia said. Do it all over knowing what I know now. What would you do differently? She thought about it, then shook her head. Nothing. I'd make every same choice, every same mistake, every same triumph, because they all led here to you, to this life, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Yates reached over and took her hand, his rough palm against hers, 2 lives worn smooth by shared work and shared years. I watched you break a wild stallion no man could touch, and I knew I'd finally met my match. Best moment of my life, seeing you in that corral, so brave and certain. I watched a cowboy watch me, Lydia said softly, and I saw respect and wonder instead of judgment or fear. And I knew that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who could see me for who I really was. That was my best moment. They sat together as the sun painted the sky gold and pink, as their grandchildren began to stir in the houses nearby, as the ranch came alive with the sounds of mourning. Yates thought about all the years behind them and whatever years remained ahead, and felt nothing but gratitude. For this woman, this life, this love that had started with a wild horse and a wilder woman and grown into something strong enough to last a lifetime. "I love you, Lydia Xavier," he said. "I love you, Yates Xavier," she replied. And in the pasture below, Shadow's descendants grazed peacefully in the morning light, carrying on the legacy of partnership and trust that had started so long ago. The wild stallion was gone, but his spirit lived on in every horse they raised, in every lesson they taught their children and grandchildren, in the very foundation of everything they'd built together. It was a good life, a full life. A life chosen freely and lived fully, with courage and love and the unshakable certainty that some matches are made not by society or expectation or convenience, but by the recognition of kindred spirits finding each other across the distances of chance and circumstance. As the sun climbed higher and the day began in earnest, Yates and Lydia rose to meet it together, as they had for 33 years, and would for whatever time remained. Partners, equals, two wild spirits who'd chosen each other and built something beautiful from that choice. The story that had started in dust and defiance had become a legacy of love, and it would endure long after they were gone, written into the land and the horses and the family they'd created together. A testament to the simple truth that the best things in life come not from breaking spirits but from honoring them, not from demanding submission but from offering respect, not from caging wildness but from running wild together. And somewhere in the valley, in the wind that rustled through the oak tree on the hill, in the thunder of hoofbeats across open ground, in the quiet, patient work of building trust between horse and human, the spirit of a black stallion ran free, having given his greatest gift not in his speed or his strength, but in bringing together two souls who were meant to find each other. The end of the beginning, and the beginning of forever, and everything that mattered in between.